I kinda need a moment before we begin this one. This is my decade. I started reviewing cartoons in 2013, and here we are 7 years later. And I'm basically looking back on my entire career. In terms of previous decades, I did have to do research, and I got introduced to a bunch of new shows that I had never seen before. But for most of the cartoons on this list, I have had an intimate knowledge with them. I have made a career bashing them, after all. And for better or worse, it's because of these shows that I have my YouTube account, which is the best thing that ever happened to me. So no matter what I say to any of these shows, I do have to be at least a little bit thankful with each and every one of them on the list. Each of them is another little memory, and they were a part of the path to where I am today. So what did we do this decade? I think the better question is, what didn't we do this decade? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. In terms of pretty much all media, the 2010s is interesting. While the consensus is the 90s was a pretty good decade in terms of at least animation, and the 2000s was not, the 2010s doesn't have much of a consensus at all, because it has both the best cartoons ever made and the worst cartoons ever made. Maybe it's just me because, like, my favorite cartoon ever and my least favorite cartoon ever both aired this decade, only a few years apart. But still, the bridge between the good stuff and the bad stuff is wider than it has ever been in history. Cartoons did all kinds of new and exciting things they didn't get a chance to do since the 90s. Streaming and the internet let shows get away from things like regulations and the old standards and practices that held a lot of creativity back. We got in shows like BoJack Horseman, Rick and Morty, and Adventure Time. Things we wouldn't have gotten in any other decade. Of course, this means we got other shows that the censors probably would have and should have gotten to, like The Problem Solvers or Big Mouth or Neo Yokio. Alright, rules for this list. I'm changing them a little bit this time around. Because I reviewed so many cartoons that aired in the 2010s, it'd be pointless and stupid for me to keep the stipulation that I couldn't have reviewed the show. I'm also still not counting internet cartoons. Maybe next decade, but not this one. They still don't have the power to really compete with the mainstream stuff yet. Also, for this list's purpose, streaming cartoons, like the stuff you'd find on Netflix or Amazon Prime, they don't count as internet cartoons. And this time around, a show only needs to have 12 episodes to be included on this list, instead of the usual 13. I decided to give a few other cartoons a little bit of an opportunity to show up here, because they really deserved it. Alright, let's walk down memory lane and see the shits that we took in the 2010s.
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We can make the plaza safe for all, so what do you say? Let's end this brawl!
Let's talk about Lauren Faust's DC Superhero Girls. I like Lauren Faust and most of her work. Friendship is Magic was obviously a big show in my life, and it's probably going to make the best list of the 2010s whenever I get around to it. But not every single episode of that show was fantastic, and I never pretended that it was. Now imagine, if you will, there was an entire show where every single episode was Dragon Quest. That's DC Superhero Girls. Personally, I don't hate feminism, but shows like this don't help with that. This is the kind of stuff that feminism gets stereotyped as, making guys look like idiots to push up their female characters. And of course, empowerment means being an asshole and being completely stoic. So many of the episodes of the show are like this. And if this entry gets you upset with my list, you're not gonna like much of the rest of it. This show does not have strong writing. If it was just the politics that was wrong with the show, there are a million shows that I could pick. No, what gets me with this show is the writing. It's bad. Like, this show seems to be written for preschoolers. It seriously feels like it was aimed at a younger audience than Friendship is Magic, which kind of backfires on the feminist aspect of the show. When Go made an episode like Boys vs. Girls, it was mocking shows like this. Shows that tried to proclaim equality, but in the end said that one side was better than the other, while making everyone completely unlikable. Because there are 6 characters, we need to have one character do the exact same thing with the other 5. Diana needs to fail at 5 different goddamn things. Bumblebee needs to try and rally all 5 of her friends. Every single episode is like this. The show is clearly inspired by one of Lauren Faust's previous projects, Super Best Friends Forever, which was a series of shorts. It sounds like a match made in heaven. Lauren gets to write on a very feminist superhero show. But the problem is, the show is still written like it's a series of shorts. Every single episode has a plot that's only worth 3 minutes, that they stretch out as much as possible. And then they throw forth the moral without any hint or subtlety. In a short, it's understandable, but in an actual cartoon, it gets old fast. But seriously, if there's any reason to hate this show, it's because each episode title starts with a hashtag. And if there's anything that can get you to appear as a piece of the worst parts of the 2010s culture, it's probably that.
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We can make the plaza safe for all, so what do you say? Let's end this brawl!
Bet you forgot about this one. Mr. Pickles is a parody of a kid's series, The Story of Lassie. Adults perverting kid stories is not a new thing in animation. In fact, there's going to be one further down this list. The singular identity of the 2010s is definitely how experimental it was. Animation in the 2010s came up with a lot of unique and interesting ideas that you wouldn't be able to find in any other decade. Even something considered creator-driven like the 90s. Of course, this is a double-edged sword. It's why the 2010s, in my opinion, was the best decade for animation history, and the worst. Gross Out came back in a big way in shows like Adventures of Kid Danger, and Fleabag Monkey Face. There are obviously a lot of these cartoons, more than I can even mention, and not a lot of spots on this list. I've long since given up talking about shows like Mr. Pickles, because there isn't much you can say about them. They're gross, and they have no tact. Beyond that, there is no substance. They exist to do nothing but to shock the audience at every single turn. Another thing that sets Mr. Pickles apart from its ilk is the actual quality of the animation is terrible. Every single character in Mr. Pickles looks disgusting. Every single frame of the show demands that you look away. To this day, Mr. Pickles is one of the most unpleasant viewing experiences that I've ever had in reviewing bad cartoons. There's no real effort here, and that's what gets the show on the list more than the other ones I've mentioned. It's just so pointless.
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We can make the plaza safe for all. So what do you say? Let's end this brawl.
Do you know what's worse than mindlessly trying to shock your audience? How about mindlessly trying to shock your audience and being bad at it? Comedy Central and Fox were racing to come up with the next Family Guy or South Park, despite the fact that both South Park and Family Guy were still running and they were still really popular. And in doing so, they came up with a string of some of the worst cartoons of all time. And Brickleberry is just the worst of them all. Every joke that you come across in this show is so patently predictable. They try and go for the most shocking things ever. Maybe back in the day, like when I first started reviewing, I would be shocked and offended and all screaming, but now I'm just so numb to this, and I'm pretty sure the vast majority of the television viewing audience is. Brickleberry is the animation equivalent of a dog finding vomit on the road, eating it, and then vomiting it back up. What do I even say about a show like Brickleberry? The characters are unlikable, the animation is shit. Well, no shit. That's what Family Guy and South Park do, is gotta be a requirement, right? Luckily for all of us, it seems like the Family Guy era is finally winding down, because I have to watch another second of Border Town. I'm gonna go on a rampage. Wait, did I just say Border Town? That's right, I wasn't talking about Border Town. Then again, maybe I was. Honestly, I can't tell the difference. Can you?
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We can make the plaza safe for all. So what do you say? Let's end this brawl. B-U-N-S-E-N, Bunsen is a beast!
On some level, I can forgive assaulting my eyes like Mr. Pickles did. But when you assault my ears like this show did, you're on my permanent shit list. And you get right into the problem with this one, even in the theme song, which was composed by... Wait, this was composed by Guy Moon. That has to be a mistake on Wikipedia. Guy Moon has been working with Butch Hartman since the beginning. He composed the theme songs to Danny Phantom and Fairly OddParents, and all the other music on the shows. And those shows had some damn good music. What the hell happened here? Oh yeah, that's right, it's the singers. Half of the song is sung by Bunsen, and the other half is Amanda. Maybe that's why the theme sounds like it does, because the voices that they chose for this show made Guy Moon go deaf.
So happy! Brain freeze! Inner beast.
I understand that Butch Hartman has kind of become a big target of the decade, because he didn't start the decade out so great, and it's kind of been worse and worse ever since. He's the M. Night Shyamalan of animation. He was once a guy who had a lot of reputation, and people expected good things about him, but then he all blew it sky high. I don't even know what to say about Bunsen is a Beast. There's so little to it. Bunsen is a Beast is not only bad, but it's my least favorite kind of bad. The kind of bad that has no substance. The annoying voices are the worst aspect of the show, but even if you look beyond it, there is nothing worth salvaging here. The characters aren't remotely interesting. It feels very much like a watered-down Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends.
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We can make the plaza safe for all. So what do you say? Let's end this brawl.
Fake news. Fake news. Fake weather.
Presenting our cartoon president. There is a lot that I could say about this show. I could say that it's an incredibly bad idea, borderline dangerous, to make a show this politically charged when our times are this divided and polarized, to the point that people rioted after the 2016 election. Much of what I don't like about this show has to do with the problem with Trump jokes in general. It's not just that Trump jokes are bad, it's that they are this black hole of comedy. I want to state that I'm not a Trump supporter. In fact, he did something terrible when he decided to run for office back in 2015. He killed the concept of comedy entirely. It's been dead since then, and I don't think it's ever going to recover. The jokes in the show are either so rote that they haven't been funny since before Trump took office, or they make no sense. Like, they're randomly coming up with quirks that don't make any sense for any of these people. That's the basis of the show. It is a Trump joke. The animation of this is just god-awful. This is some of the lowest quality that I have ever seen. And considering we're talking about the world of adult animation where Family Guy is the standard, that's saying something. I heard that the show needed to be storyboarded and animated quickly because it needs to keep up with current events. Unless you're doing the South Park thing, having stylization that allows you to do things really quickly, animation is a terrible medium for riffing on current events. Now what's worse though? The voices in this show. Have you ever heard a child come up with a mocking voice for someone that they don't like? Well, that's everyone in this fucking show. Every single person talks like that.
I have to go. I just heard the sun and moon are switching places.
If that's true, the birds would be going nuts.
Up, we just lost the lease on Capitol Hill.
The show actually makes Trump seem like an underdog hero in some episodes with these little arcs, and it makes everyone in Washington seem corrupt or like an idiot. In this time when our nation is more divided than it has been in over half a century, I do think it is a good thing that there's something both left-wing and right-wing can agree on, and that's that this show is completely garbage.
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We could make the plaza safe for all. So what do you say? Let's end this brawl.
Alright, so maybe shows by big-name stars like Daniel Tosh and Stephen Colbert don't work out too well. Maybe we need someone who actually has experience in making good shows. Like the guy who made Moral Oral. He's got some real talent. Let's give him a show. What could possibly go wrong?
I can't wait till I get old and my memories start to unfold about High School USA.
High School USA is legitimately one of the worst pieces of media that I've ever had to experience. Let me give you a taste of what this show is like. The first episode is about bullying. It's titled Bullying. They thought that it would be funny to make a coming out story, metaphorically linking being a bully to being gay. The second episode ends triumphantly with all the boys texting dick pics. Because who the hell gives a fuck? It tackles all the typical adult cartoon stuff. Sex changes, drugs, and it does each and every single one of them poorly. These kind of jokes would be tasteless at the best of times, but in the 2010s, when social tensions have gotten worse and worse, this is the equivalent of playing with matches in a room full of dynamite. This is the kind of show that exists for no other reason than to get a rise out of people. Whether it succeeds or fails, it's garbage on the premise alone. And if you're looking at this, you might see that it looks familiar. Doesn't this kind of look like Archie? Yes, it does. It's a quote-unquote parody of Archie, where each of the characters are given the most basic parody treatment, and it's used to tell the laziest adult jokes you can imagine. Look, I could go on with this one, but there's still 5 cartoons to go. And this kind of show really just deserves its own deep dive into every single problem wrong with it.
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We could make the plaza safe for all. So what do you say? Let's end this brawl.
A lot of terrible cartoon reboots came out in the 2010s that completely missed the point of the original, but Powerpuff is the worst of them all. The Powerpuff Girls 2016 is one of the few shows out there that makes me feel legitimately unclean. This show disgusts me in ways that Seth MacFarlane only wishes he could. It had 6-year-old girls twerking. We had an adult princess giving a prolonged kiss on the mouth to Buttercup. And then we had the infamous Jared Shapiro incident. What the show did was took the likeness of a writer, gave him a similar name to the writer, and then made him a love interest in the show. This is a very specific kind of bad. This is not only a thing that grown-ass adults shouldn't do, this is the kind of thing that you shouldn't have to tell grown-ass adults that they should not do. This goes beyond common sense. I'm not saying that anyone behind the show is a pedophile, let me make that very clear, but even in that case, there's a problem. The problem is that they clearly didn't think jack shit when they went into writing this one. These are some of the most blatant, forefront, unfortunate implications that I've ever seen. That alone would probably put this show on my list, but the pedophilic implications are like only a cherry on top of the sundae with how bad Powerpuff Girls 2016 is. The show clearly wanted to cash in on the whole idea of girl power, a common selling point in the 2010s. It tries to put forward a progressive message, but it trips over its high heels as it goes through the starting gate. This show feels very much like intentional sabotage. It feels very much like the people behind the show hated the Powerpuff Girls and just wanted to destroy it by any means necessary. Because every single decision into the show makes me hate it more. Like, you know, turning down the original voice actresses for the Powerpuff Girls. And then there was that whole incident with Donnie. I wanted to believe that it was the network's idea to say that a horse turning into a monster was a metaphor for being a trans person, but these are the people who thought it would be cool unusual to have a character look like an adult with a similar name of an adult be an object of affection of a child. This show is disgusting. I've said that before, but I have to keep saying it. Not only is this show disgusting, it's disgusting in the worst morally abhorrent ways.
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We could make the plaza safe for all. So what do you say? Let's end this brawl.
If you have photosensitive epilepsy, then you're gonna have to keep your eyes shut for this one.
We are the problem solvers.
And that's 95% of the reason that the Problem Solvers is on the list, and this high up. Problem Solvers is a visual atrocity. It has so many colors and so many flashing lights that it could legitimately either cause seizures or some kind of vision problem. It didn't think things through. Someone, somewhere, had to have said that this was a bad idea. The network must have said something. They would be responsible if something happens. It's been a while since Electric Soldier Porygon, but what happened there, exaggerated or not, is still fresh in everyone's minds. And the sad part is, even when you get beyond the visuals, the show is garbage. The character designs are ugly, at least the original ones from the show. One of the characters is basically Domokun, and he's the guy that they made most unlikable. And if the visuals aren't bad enough, the voices do not help. This is the kind of show that exists for no other reason than to assault your senses. It's like going to a hard rock concert without actually getting the experience of hearing a band live, just screaming and flashing strobe lights. If it wasn't for the seizure-inducing visuals, I think the show would be garbage, but it probably wouldn't be one of the worst of the decade. There's just way too much competition in that world.
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We could make the plaza safe for all. So what do you say? Let's end this brawl.
Everything okay in here, sweetie?
Get the hell out, Shannon! Get out!
Speaking of shows that disgust me on a visceral level, we have Big Mouth. Big Mouth is a show that you either really, really love or you consider it the worst that you've ever seen. There is no in between. A lot of people love this show. It even had 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is confusing to me. I'm not going to pretend that I'm not biased. But if I could say something in my defense, the most obvious question about this show was, does this show count as child pornography? To end this debate once and for all, this show does not count as child pornography, because they had to basically skirt the law to make the show. Drawings do count as child pornography in the United States if they resemble actual identifiable people. So now you know why each and every single character looks like a fish or a frog. This show makes me incredibly uncomfortable in ways that most others do not. The show takes a lot of influence from Family Guy, which is problem number one. But what I mean by that isn't that the bad animation or the humor is meant to be shocking. No, it's Family Guy and its dialogue and its pacing. In this show, they basically go on in discussion about penises or ejaculation for like minutes at a time. Even if I wasn't grossed out, it gets old quick. It also has a lot of the drive-by opinions on current events or pop culture that Family Guy is known for as well, and it's bad at it. In episode 2, for instance, it's going into a girl getting her first period. It's a daring topic to tackle, and it seems like they showcase the experience correctly and with respect. That episode also has a joke about a kid who was paralyzed because he got vaccinated. This is every single episode, by the way. That's why this show is the way it is. It wants to relate to people going through puberty and give them some kind of guidance. So why isn't this show number 1? Well, there is one reason that I found. These are topics that we should be less afraid to talk about as a culture. When it comes to these kind of topics, they almost always go like this at first. The first LGBT characters in cartoons, for instance, were extremely flamboyant and stereotypical. These would be seen as atrocious today, and you'd be blasted for homophobia. However, they were an important stepping stone to get where we are today. This show could easily break the mold for someone else talking about puberty in a much more smart way. This show is incredibly stupid, but in terms of what it's actually trying to talk about, I've never seen it as being disrespectful. Big Mouth tries, and that's more than you could say about a lot of other shows. It's just like bad at it, like awful, like puke-inducingly bad at it. And it's not even my number 1 pick for the decade. We're gonna get to that in a few minutes, but first, some dishonorable mentions that didn't make the list for whatever reason. Let's start with Breadwinners. Hey, remember when I said that this was the worst cartoon that I've ever seen? Sanjay and Craig. It's bad. It's gross. It has nothing redeemable. The Adventures of Kid Danger. But if you really want to, consider it a tie for number 4. Monsters vs. Aliens. I've spent more time on this one sentence than they did actually making the fucking cartoon. Neo Yokio. Hey, did you guys know that they animated Jaden Smith's Twitter account? Fleabag Monkey Face. Teen Titans Go. this is actually not a dishonorable mention on this list. It's not even bad enough to be considered on a list like this. I'm only mentioning it here because people would be asking about it if I didn't. The Magic School Bus rides again. Border Town. This show is often seen as a Seth MacFarlane show. It's not. He was just a producer, but he didn't actually create it. But whether or not he had any direct involvement, it's clearly just another Seth MacFarlane show, with the same basic setup and the same basic style of humor and the same lack of reason for existing. Legend of Chamberlain Heights. This is another show that I don't even want to dignify. It's not on this list because it shouldn't qualify for this list. Bless the Hearts. This is just a reminder that no matter how into animation and how thoroughly I've searched for the worst cartoons of the decade, I still haven't seen everything. And finally, Alan Gregory. I doubt I'm going to forget Alan Gregory. Now, let's talk about another show that I'm never going to forget.
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We could make the plaza safe for all. So what do you say? Let's end this brawl.
That guy sucked.
Okay, so the first question is obvious. Does this even count? Yes, it does. It had more than 12 episodes in the 2010s. It counts, by my definition. Not only that, but it has been airing continually throughout the 2010s, year in and year out, getting worse and worse with every single episode. 2010's Family Guy is not the same show as 2000's Family Guy. They are not even in the same ballpark. Every problem that I've had with just about every other show on this list, on any list, is in this show, bright and clear. I'd count the reasons that I hate the show, but they don't make numbers that high. I have no idea why anyone watches this show, for one main reason. This show legitimately does not like its audience. And of course there are the cutaways, which have gotten worse and lazier and just more frequent, and it's been trying my patience now for more than half the decade. And let me calm down right now. If I had to say something to Seth MacFarlane himself, I have to say this. Please stop. Stop trying to be funny. You are not funny. You're not a comedian. I know that you want to entertain people and make them laugh, and that is definitely admirable. I've also heard that you do suffer from depression, so maybe you think that trying to be funny is all that you have, but you are not an untalented guy. You may have signs of doubt, but try something new for once. And I don't mean try something that isn't a cartoon. Please try something that's not a comedy. Write something dramatic for once. Or hell, get out of the writing business altogether and become a singer. Because if there's one thing that you're good at, is singing. Trust me. You do not want Family Guy to be the big thing that you're known for the rest of history. I'm MrEnter's saying, I hope none of this crap survives into the 2020s, even though like half of these shows are still airing. I eagerly await the new flavors of shit that we have to deal with in the upcoming decade. And who knows, maybe someday I'll still be around on YouTube to make the top 10 worst cartoons of the 2020s.
So I plead with you, my plaza folks, please turn in all of your remotes. We could make the plaza safe for all. So what do you say? Let's end this brawl.
No way! It keeps me safe from dangers.
No
way! There could be evil strangers.
No way!
That I'd keep in mind too.
No way!
To protect me from you.
Well, what about rules and regulations for when, where, and how they're used? Ban this remote from all situations where it can be abused.
That infringes on individual liberty, and I won't take responsibility